Nari McDiarmid with you here at Mining News Select in Sydney, and we're joined by Sean Russo, Joint Managing Director of Noah's Rule. And Sean, let's talk about hedging. Fewer companies are. Is there still a place for this?
Oh, absolutely there is. I think there's two things we can come back to the different types of hedging, because I think that's really important how it's changing. But first, to address the current status of the mature companies that exist and have been either unhedged now or have been in some cases buying back or closing out the last of their hedging. I think the circumstances for them have changed so much. Their operating margins are now so great that only a couple of years ago, where they were maybe concerned about whether or not they'd make enough money to meet all their sort of ongoing obligations, they're now full of cash. Their balance sheets are very strong, and they feel that they don't need to enter into hedging, and there's a lot of pressure on those companies in particular coming into indices and things like that from large institutional investors. So we don't want you to hedge, we want full exposure to the upside. I mean, we could spend days talking about that particular issue, but we'll leave it at that. But so I think for those larger companies it is, but I think for junior companies coming up, the ones that are wanting to start now, that perhaps are only able to start now because prices are higher and have a higher cost base, and perhaps only have the kind of margins they're imagining, and the kind of margins that these very successful companies used to enjoy when prices were lower, they need to think about things very differently. And it's very true that some of the most successful companies in Australia, whether it be Northern Star, whether it be Evolution, whether it be Ramelius, Saracen as a predecessor to Northern Star, used hedging very actively in their early years. Hedging is about trying to minimise equity dilution when your share price doesn't reflect the circumstances. Now, we're at a mining conference. You're not going to meet a single mining conference here at this conference, a junior, that's going to tell you their share price accurately reflects the value of their in-ground inventory, right? We know that. So if your share price isn't reflecting the value of your in-ground inventory, you should be doing everything you can to avoid issuing more shares. Hedging has traditionally been a part of the market to support debt. But if you go back a couple of years ago, the only type of hedging that you could do to support debt was to forward sell or to do a collar. You had to do some kind of committed hedge that locked you into a price higher than the price prevailing on the day, locking enough of a margin in above your costs that the bank was willing to lend you money. When you get to the end of the exercise and someone says, oh, that hedging cost you money, what's your share price? Because the cost of hedging has to be measured against the value of dilution avoided. And so there's lots of very successful companies. Capricorn's a very good example. Hedging has cost that company a lot of money over the years, but it avoided them having to fund Carl Winder with equity when their share price was 30, 40, 50 cents. They could have the same market capitalisation today and a share price of 1/2 or 1/3 of what it currently is, had they funded with equity. And there are a lot of juniors falling into that trap now that are saying, because equity is available, I'm going to fund with equity. So there is a middle path, and put options, investors are going to be seeing a lot more announcements about this. A lot of companies are coming to the market now and saying, I've got a discrete ore body, I can mine it in the next 2 years, I can toll treat it, I can do a ore sales agreement. And they're talking about creating cash that's many, many multiples of their current market capitalisation. But they might need $10 or $15 million to get into a position of being in production. Equity is a very expensive way to do that. But what they can do at the moment is they can borrow money and they can buy put options, which gives them the right, but not the obligation to sell in the future at a price below the current price.
So effectively a hedge against loss.
So it's a hedge against, it locks in a minimum price. So it's a hedge against a loss, or it's actually a hedge to lock in a minimum level of profitability, but not in any way constraining the upside. So there's no delivery, no fixed price, no delivery commitment. It's an insurance policy.
Are they too good to be true though, Sean?
Well, this is a really interesting thing, that in many cases when we're sitting around board tables and management has explained to the board what they're wanting to do, non-exec directors quite rightly are saying, well, this sounds too good to be true. If this were true, why didn't Bellevue do that? If this were true, why didn't some other company do that? People that have had trouble, or maybe there's a negative connotation in the recent past associated to hedging. Well, when they were looking to do those financing, it wasn't possible to do hedges. The market price wasn't high enough to allow it. So they're not too good to be true, but it's rare. And I've been in this business now for 41 years, and this is only the third window in 41 years where you could use put options to successfully underwrite borrowings to build a project. One was in the late 80s, one was in 2011-12, and then really in the last 2 years. So you've got a situation right at the moment that a junior mining company can avoid equity dilution, borrow money, and actually borrow more money and spend the rest of that money on the put options, which creates the certain level of revenue that the lender wants to actually bring that project into production with a minimum, I won't say guaranteed minimum level of profitability, because nothing's guaranteed on the mining side of things, but on the sales side of things, if they produce what they're expecting, they can underwrite a minimum price of $5,000 or $5,500, which sounds like a long way away from $7,300 we're at today, but it's still a very good price if you're digging out of the ground for $3,000, and certainly sufficient to underwrite that debt and leave all of the upside there for shareholders.
An interesting time to be watching the industry.
It sure is.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Pleasure.